Hello and welcome to Fall Through, your source for deep conversations about technology, software, and computing. I'm your host, Chris Brando, also known as Scriptable, and in today's episode, we are talking about JJ, a new VCS tool that's kind of blowing up in popularity. And we have Steve Klabnik to talk about his relationship with JJ and his most recent announcement about his decision to leave Oxide and go to a VCS company dedicated to building I think it's like a central repository service-like thing for JJ. As always, we have extended content for our supporters, as well as higher quality audio. So if you're not a supporter already, head to fallthrough.fm/subscribe and sign up today. And if you're not following us on social media, give us a follow there. And if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like and that subscribe button. We really appreciate it. And with that, let's get into the show. It's funny because I don't even know if I'm going to put a transition thing here. Yeah, figure it out in post. It's always fun to figure things out in post.
You can go post-ironic with it and just literally play this as your transition area thingy.
I could. I've done that a couple times. It's funny. I don't decide what I do until I actually get into post. Anyway, welcome back, viewer, listener. If I don't know if we left all of that in, but we might have left some of it in. And if we didn't leave it all in, you're probably confused right now. Anyway, we're here today. I'm here with my co-host, Matthew Sanabria, as always. Man, I feel like you, me, and Angelica Matt are just really hosted all these episodes. I don't know where Dylan and Ian are, but I hope they come back soon.
I hope they're okay. Actually, I think Dylan's okay. I heard from him. I don't know about Ian.
Okay. I think Ian's okay too. I think they're just living their lives. Perfect. But how are you today? Doing well?
Great. Yeah. Just got back from traveling yesterday, so back to it.
God, you spend so much of your life on planes. It's
I'm not going to do that in 2026. I'll tell you that much.
Like, no more travel. You're going to be like, Brian, I'm staying home, okay?
Yeah, I need some time at home, okay?
I need to help with this chocolate shop.
Yeah.
And we have joining us as well, Steve. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, as always. It's a good time.
Yeah, of course. I feel like, at some point you're going to have been on more episodes than Dylan or Ian, and I don't know what we do then. Is that when you become like a host instead of just a guest host? I don't know.
I guess so. I don't know. We'll see. It's an accidental podcast host would be a very funny title.
I feel like that would be very on brand for you, though. Of like,
so my very first job as a software engineer was an internship in college. Was at a company called Libsyn, which still exists and hosts a lot of podcasts. At the time, it was like 80% of the podcasts on iTunes were hosted by them. So I actually have like deep podcasting roots, actually.
A nice little story arc for you there, character development arc.
Yeah,
started out in
everything
podcasting.
that's happened before will happen again is the what happens, which is kind of almost the JJ theme to some degree, because that was the theme of the blog post we're going to talk about.
Yes. So
a little smooth transition. I got podcast host in my blood.
You got it. It's right there. But yeah, so I think we should start out. Maybe we should talk about your blog post a bit, and then we can kind of go back and talk about what JJ is. Because I unlike you, do not wish to bury the lead about what is happening. So I feel like we should maybe just start there. So you want to talk about your blog post a little bit?
Totally. So the joke is I mentioned burying the lead twice in my blog post, but the short of it is I've decided to leave Oxide, not because I don't love it. It's the best job I've ever had. My coworkers are all fantastic, but sometimes when you get interested in a thing, you got to double down and follow that. And so I've been at Oxide for like 6 years, and so that's great, but also sometimes it's time for a little shakeup. So I'm super sad to go, but I'm also happy to go do the new thing, which is to like work on JJ as a job, basically. So JJ is a new version control system, but the key thing about it is that it is like pluggable backends. So the public like open source backend is a Git backend. So you can use JJ to work on a Git repo yourself, and no one needs to know or care. And I think that's like the killer feature that lets it be adopted at all, because you don't need to force your team members to switch. You don't need to not use GitHub or whatever other Git tooling you're using. You can still use all that stuff. You just get to use your own stuff yourself. But it's a little bit more than just like a UI on top of Git. So for example, we'll talk about this more later too, but Google is a major user of JJ, and they have a backend for their centralized version control system, Piper. And so you can actually use JJ with the Google monorepo. And so, it's like a little more than just like a fancy UI on top of Git, because the Git internals are not actually required. It is a truly like pluggable backend system kind of thing. Although, because the only open source one is the Git one, and because Git is used in most open source projects, that's like a little bit moot, but it's also, I don't know, important and technically interesting, I think. And also because it's like not just a technical thing, it's sort of like a social adoptability thing. I also think that's kind of cool. So that's sort of the highest level explanation.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like we've all been on Git for so long now. I mean, it's almost been 20 years, or no, it has been 20 years since Git first came into the world and took everything by storm. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of hard to move from something like Git to something else when everybody is using that thing. But it'd probably be nice to have a little bit more diversity within the version control ecosystem, because Git is great, but there are a lot of rough edges, I guess you could say, to using Git. And there's a pretty big learning curve, which I think for the people who have invested in going through that learning curve, they're likely not as happy that there's things coming around that could supplant Git eventually. But I think for everybody that has not gone through that learning curve, they're like, oh my God, something that is not this awful UI for the thing I have to use every day.
Yeah, it just depends, because like I really loved Git, and I really loved using Git, and I was never one of those people that thought the CLI was confusing. I will defend Git checkout -b forever, actually. But it's funny because even I was like conservative like that, because I used it for so long. Like someone's like, oh, you should use Git switch, and I was like, I don't really use new Git commands though. Like I'm fine with just using Git checkout for that tool. And they're like, Git switch landed like 9 years ago, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I baked in my command knowledge before that happened, actually. And so it's funny. I think it's also like very easy for people to feel very passionate on this topic, because if you're a professional software developer, version control is something you interact with every day as part of the thing that you're using. And so it's like, and if you're a company, like it's holding the crown jewels of your company's, output, which is the source code of what you're building. And so it's something that like is intricately tied to our actual jobs, and like it's an important set of things. And so like it totally makes sense that it's the thing that people care passionately about one way or the other for a lot of reasons. I think it's kind of like, it's like text editors and then version control are like like very tightly related in terms of things that people like to use and care about. So
it's even things that people like to argue about, because text editors.
Yeah. I actually think that like Vim is an interesting analogy for JJ and for version control stuff, because like it's a lot of people care about ease of use, and ease of use is important, but also, there's just naturally a learning curve when you learn a new thing. And like Vim is not bad, because when you first load it up, you don't know how to quit it and you struggle a little bit, right? Like there can be a little bit of time before you end up learning how to use a tool. And so I think there's like the balance of what does it get you versus what does it not. And one of the themes of my blog post was comparing Rust to JJ. And a lot of the reason why I'm making this move is because I see a lot of weird parallels between Rust and JJ, even though one's a language and one's a version control system. And one of those ones is that like people that are experienced with Git struggle with JJ a little bit more than people who don't struggle with Git or are totally new to version control. I've like shared JJ with some friends who are like product managers at a company where they need to interact with Git repositories, and they're like, this is so much easier for me, actually. Like, and that's nice. And then sort of like me and some other people on the other end of being like, I use Git stuff all the time. I think I said on Blue Sky yesterday to someone that I was like, I like JJ because it lets me do all my sicko stuff much more easily than it does in Git. And so there's sort of this interesting thing where I think it's like both easier for new people and easier for power users. And that's just like something that does not happen in software very often. That doesn't mean it will be trivial for you to switch immediately. I think there's some sort of like brain adjustments to the way that JJ works in a way that's a little different than Git. But I think that once you do, it ends up being simpler, even when you're trying to do complicated things. And I think that's like an important thing about a good tool, and very rare in software. Usually stuff that's more powerful is harder to use.
Right. Matt, what are your thoughts about JJ and all of this?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm sad that Steve's leaving Oxide, but it's one of those departures that you look at it and you say, "Oh, that actually makes sense." You know what? I'm glad for you. So I really am glad, and good luck on the new role. Obviously, I've been using JJ since I started at Oxide. I think it was Rain or Steve. I can't remember who like turned me on to JJ. Maybe it was Rain. I don't remember, but I tried it. Went through your tutorial, Steve. Recorded my own tutorial on YouTube as well. Like went through the docs, and I was like, wow, I get it. I get what they're trying to do here. Like I get the whole, you don't work on branches, you work on this sort of detached head state, and you are basically responsible for walking the graph that is your source control and doing whatever you need to with the nodes in that graph. And I liked that better. So I left Git behind very quickly, and I have not used Git in the almost 1 year I've been at Oxide, which has been great. And like Steve mentioned up top, nobody knows that I use JJ. I mean, people at Oxide do because we talk about it. We have a channel for it. But everyone else that interacts with me over like a source control, like a Git repository, they have no idea that I'm using JJ unless they read my weird branch names that I push up there, because I use auto-generated branch names. I don't even think about branch names anymore. Just auto-gen. So like for me, I like it a lot, and it's really easy to use. And the only time I ever fall back to Git is to like create tags, because JJ doesn't have that support yet. But that's
it's
like
so
very
easy
rare.
to run git tag, and it just works that like
Yeah.
running a JJ command that just writes git tag is like not a priority, basically.
Yep,
Like,
agreed.
the JJ
Yeah.
project themselves even just creates tags on GitHub, like in the web UI for the ones for JJ itself, since JJ is hosted on GitHub. So like, yeah.
Yeah, and the only time you're ever creating tags really is when you're doing a release, and that's usually a more manual process depending on what you're doing, because you want to make sure like, okay, I'm creating the tag for the right revision, blah blah blah. But then yeah, after that, I JJ everything. It's been a really good experience, and I'm excited to see like a GitHub style replacement that's focused more around JJ than it is around strictly Git.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when I hear like, because I haven't used JJ, so I'm like the one person that's on this little panel here that's just like, yeah, I don't know how this thing works. Sounds cool though, but also like the idea of like, oh, just using a detached head always reminds me how it's like Git branches don't exist in the way people think they do. Like I think people are just like, oh yeah, there's this branch thing that exists in Git. I'm like, no, it's really just a pointer at a commit. And then you just like, when you do a new commit, you just kind of point it at the new commit, and you just do that over time. There's a whole bunch of pointers, which is, I've always loved that about Git, but I think that's probably also confusing to a lot of people who don't understand what Git is underneath, but only understand it like conceptually at the higher levels.
Julia Evans has a really great blog post about this. That's like, I think it's called Branches in Theory and in Reality. And it's like, there's sort of 3 different mental models that people have of what is a branch. Like she posted, what do you think a Git branch is? And there's sort of like 3 different answers to that are all sort of coherent. And so, yeah, definitely like even amongst Git users, like the way that and if you do understand it, like I know what a Git branch is, but I will colloquially use it for a slightly different term than what it actually is, which is all of the commits back to the root that it's branched off of from a particular name. But that's like not what it is actually in the like data structure sense of Git.
Right. I think that also is part, like some of the stuff is, I think what trips people up is that like under the hood Git is not weird, but I don't think, like if you think about it from the base point of like, this is a content addressable file system, and we have built on top of that a version control system. And so it's like there are things that you just kind of get from it being a content addressable file system, like histories, like causal histories that you can just like trace along, and then you can just like point to any point in that causal history, and now you have a branch-like thing. And if you understand it that way, I think it's like, oh, okay, no, this makes sense now, that why these are just pointers. But if you don't understand that, then it's like, okay, this is a bit strange though. Like this is weird. But I do, there are so many things I do like about Git that I'm hoping that, because like the other part of this, right, is that JJ is trying to have its own like back end that is not Git or anything, or is it just meant to be a front end for everything?
The most important thing is that it has pluggable backends and that those like exist and they're not just nothing. So there is a JJ native backend that got renamed to the test backend because it's basically used only for testing, because at this point the Piper backend and the Git backend have really demonstrated that like two vastly different version control systems can both be implemented correctly. So like the trick is more about like maintaining that interface is not too overly tied to one specific version control system semantics. So there's not really any desire for a JJ native backend for most people. I think that like for example, at my new job, like we will be implementing our own backend for our own reasons. But like that's not something that like most people that are interested in open source are just interested in using the Git backend. And so a sort of native backend doesn't really buy you a whole lot for many projects. So like we'll see. I mean, I think that like one interesting thing is that like pluggable backends mean that you don't necessarily, if something new and better than JJ comes out, you'll be able to use JJ with whatever that thing is as well, because then you can just implement a backend for it. And so, you know, I think this sort of the flexibility is what matters more than there sort of being a like particular native backend, or at least at this stage anyway. Like there's definitely reasons why a non-Git backend might make sense, but they're not like the highest priority thing for a pre 1.0 software project. Like, you know, there's also the question of like, at this stage in JJ's life, what is the most useful thing to be done? And having some sort of non-Git open source backend is just not important or worth putting time into, as opposed to a lot of other work that needs to be done.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense, because it's like with Git, I feel like a lot of people's apprehension to Git is in that interface that it has of just like, oh, I don't really like this. I don't like these weird commands. I think part of it too might be that there are so many of us that use the old commands. Like I still use git checkout teshbe for a lot of stuff. And it's just like people are like, oh, there's git switch, and there's all these like, and there are some things I should probably start using, like git work trees, but there's like all of this really old stuff, and then they made an effort to make a newer, shinier interface, and then a bunch of us were just like, nah, but we like the old interface. So I think new people entering, they're like, okay, let me like search around the internet for help on how this interface is supposed to work. And you get like conflicting opinions about things, and it can be confusing if you don't understand that. You know, those things are like equivalent to each other, and you could use them interchangeably if you'd like.
To be honest, I didn't even know git switch was a thing for a long time. You know, it's been in the, like you said, it's been in the code base for a while, but I've been using git checkout forever. And then someone mentioned to me git switch was a thing, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. So thank you. But also, I guess I'm not going to use it because there's no reason to. Like, you know, it's one of those. But it's weird because I'm generally someone that likes to try out different tools. Because here's my thing, and I think Mitchell is where I first heard about JJ.
Mitchell Hashimoto.
Yeah, Mitchell Hashimoto. Now that I remember. I tend to like to try new different tools just to see like what different paradigms they give me and what different workflows they give me, and not because I want to switch tools every 2 months. I definitely don't want to do that. I obviously have real work to do, but it is nice to challenge your sort of workflow and assumptions and see like, why am I using a given tool? Because I firmly believe that most of us, we don't do some sort of evaluation of our tools before we choose one. We just choose the one that's nearest to us or that's there at the time where we got started with whatever project. And that's how we end up on Vim or on, you know, Git or on JetBrains editors or on Mac, or like you just use whatever tool is kind of near you and going to solve the problem that you think or that a trusted friend told you about. And we don't do this sort of evaluation of like, is this tool actually good for me? It solves the problems, but is it good for me? You know, and it's like using like a right-handed scissor or left-handed scissor. You wouldn't know until you picked one up and you're like, wait, this feels weird, you know? And I kind of like to step back and look at these different tools and just challenge my assumptions about them and see like, hey, is this actually better for me? And that's what I did with Helix, the editor. That's what I did with JJ. That's what I did when I like Mac OS Linux stuff. But JJ specifically, it was one of the tools that I was like, wow, this is actually better than what it's replacing in an objective way to me. And also the migration process was like very, very minor and small and easy to me. So it kept me using it. And then after just a couple of weeks of using JJ, I was like, oh, what's Git? You just forget about Git. You're like, I don't know that old tool. And it's just amazing how fast your muscle memory and your mind and all of that stuff updates to using something new just because you spent like a day or two or a week or two with it. And I don't know, I just hope people do that.
Yeah. I think for a lot of tools too, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because it's like a lot of tools, people pick them when they have like the least amount of knowledge about that class of tools, and then they don't go back and like
Exactly.
rethink like, oh, now that I have more knowledge about this class of tool, maybe I should sit down and figure out like, is this the tool I actually want to use? Because there's also like a when aspect of that, where it's just like, oh, at what point do you actually decide you have enough knowledge to go back and do the reevaluation? And usually you never feel like you have enough knowledge to do that. To do that reevaluation, so you just kind of keep going and you don't ever really stop. And then you also kind of get stuck in your ways of like, but I've already used this tool for so much, I've already learned so much, how am I gonna learn something new? That sounds like a lot of work. I don't want to do a lot of work. Which is like, honestly, like one of the reasons I stick with Vim, aside from NeoVim being really like dope, it's mostly because of that, but it's also because like every time I go into a new editor of some sort and I'd like try to use it, I'd be like, wait, I can't be nearly as efficient as I am in Vim with this. People are like, oh, just turn on Vim emulation mode. I'm like, yes, this is very much emulating Vim, and it is not emulating it well. So no, thank you. But I'm also just like, how much do I care about my editor experience to like do a switch to something new at the end of the day? Like, how much is this thing bothering me? And for me, it turns out that it's just like usually not nearly enough. And like now NeoVim is like shiny and has all of the integrations that I want, that it's just like, it's not like I'm programming in the Stone Age, right? It's like, no, I have all of the nice like, oh, like overlays and language protocol servers and all of that. So it's like I can do all of the things I want to do. Also, like, side note, but language server protocol is like such an obnoxious name for something, because it's just like you have to be like, oh, the language server protocol client or the language server protocol server. And I'm like, come on, Microsoft. You could have named this better. You could have named this better.
You're asking the company responsible for Windows 8.1 and 3 and 7, whatever, Vista. No, come on.
It's just LSP. I don't think about what the letters mean to me personally. So
I mean, fair.
But I did, when you said it the first time, I was like, wait, did you just say did they just say language protocol server or language server protocol? Which one is it? Oh, wait, it's LSP. Okay, yes, right.
Yeah, I was in my own head. I was like, language server protocol. It's good. Great thing that they created. Just awful name, which I feel like is just what happens a lot in tech. It's just great thing, awful name. But yeah, it's like going back and reevaluating your tools can often be a challenge, and it can be difficult to get people to move. And I think the approach that most people have when building something new is like being like, well, this thing is obviously better, so all of you should want to move to it. And I'm just going to ignore all of that pain that comes with moving to the thing and just like be like, no, this thing is clearly better. You're crazy if you don't think it's better. And just uproot your entire life, uproot your entire workflow. It'll be fine.
So there's a word you said there is very significant, actually, which is obviously better. And I think that the interesting thing about people who say this kind of thing is they use obviously as a shortcut for not needing to justify why it is better. And so you're just supposed to assume that it is, and therefore you should use it, and without actually explaining to you like why it is better. And this like matters a lot in tool adoption, because people are just like, oh, this is clearly better, so you should just use it. And it's like, that's not a convincing argument, actually. That's just like saying some words. In some of the comments on my thread, somebody was pointing out why like PJoule and Darks are like better than Git and JJ, because they're based on this like commutative theory of patches. And you may be like, well, what's the commutative theory of patches and why should I care? And what I said to them was basically like, yes, I think this is the problem, is that the people who advocate for that style of version control have not like done a good job of articulating the benefits of it to people, And so that's why they don't find it like convincing that is actually a better way of doing things. And so if I was like interested in advocating for that, I would be trying to figure out like why my messaging is not resonating. And they replied with something like, well, I mean, it has been clearly communicated. See, if you have a graph of like ABC and you're moving to a graph of ABC prime, and then like, there's like a conflict between some of the sublines in the graph, then that means that like the hashes are stable no matter what order you rearrange the commits in, but otherwise they're not. And I was just like, way to prove exactly what my point was, which is like, this is like not a compelling argument for why I should care, because the f does that mean? Basically. So I didn't reply that back to them because it felt kind of rude. I was just like, I'm just gonna let this stand as like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I don't even really need to like say anything because it's like kind of obvious. And so that's like the trick. And this is not like to rip on that particular person or even those particular tools. It's just like, this is a very common thing in people advocating for technologies they're interested in, is they like don't know how to message about it effectively. And so that's like, because it's hard. It's a lot of work. Yeah. And that's what I've spent a lot of my time and effort doing. So yeah.
I guess we've arrived to this point of the conversation. Good. It's true. I mean, not even just the messaging, they don't know how to message it, but also they strictly focus on the technical side of the messaging that doesn't really make sense to the lay person that's going to want to use this thing, or they don't even care. You know what I mean? And for me, that's huge. And I see this in a lot of repositories and people online where it's just like, this is a technically superior product in every way. And it's like, well, nobody cares about that. You're not telling them the more user-friendly marketing case of this. So just think about that for a second. Because yeah, I can see the technical benefit, but you're losing most of your potential users because you're not explaining this well. And this is a big thing of developers do this all the time in our industry. They just don't know how, they don't think about their product that they're building. And even if it's just an open source, tool or whatever, they don't think about it. And the README is filled with kind of crap that nobody cares about,
Yeah. What it is not as important as what it can let you do.
Right.
Like what it can let you do is the first, and what it is does matter, but it's like secondary to like, what does this allow me to accomplish that my existing tool does not allow me to accomplish? And then after that, it's like, okay, how does it accomplish it? Because the details do matter and how things are built does matter, but they don't matter more than like what abilities it gives me in actually doing a thing.
Yeah. And it's always nice to say what something is in a like nice terse sentence that relates it to another thing in the field too, right? Like JJ's a source control system. Great. Like, okay, I understand what source control, I understand the purpose of that. And then you can say like, oh, it lets you do blah, 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 blah. Or it conflicts are easier in JJ, or some sort of hook that tells people, oh, that's going to solve a problem I had with other source control systems. Let me see what this is like. And I think obviously JJ was being developed, or still is being developed, and there were tutorials out there, yours and others, and it was a little difficult to get started at first because the tutorial and knowledge stuff wasn't really there yet, right? I think even in your tutorial you said that like you didn't find the original tutorial as clear or whatever.
Yeah, it was. I read it and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing at all.
Yeah. So you wrote your own tutorial to help other people, and I read your tutorial, and so on and so forth. And we're kind of helping shape JJ's marketing, so to speak, and getting more people to use it. But once I did get over the other line or whatever, the other side of the fence, I don't know, whatever analogy I'm trying to make there. Once I did learn enough to understand JJ, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. And I got to that point where it like clicked, and then never went back to Git. Right? Like I don't even care about using Git anymore because JJ just solved my problems and I understand its core use case and philosophy. But it took me a little bit to get there. And like, I'm not a new engineer in this field. You know what I mean? Like I know things, I think.
Here's a fun thing about branding is that you also just said a thing which has a very fun history, and I've never told anybody this specifically, but before the election, Kamala had a really great slogan, which is "We're not going back." And I was like, that's a good slogan. And then of course she immediately dropped it because anything that's effective, they just drop right away. But I like was talking about JJ at one point on Hacker News, and I was like, I was like, they're like, do you ever go back to Git? And something clicked, and I was like, I'm never going back. Was the thing, and I was like, that was so resonant to me in that moment before, and so I was like, I'm gonna use it again. And so I've seen people say this on JJ threads now. They say like, I'm not going back, and then you also just said it there as like a very fun, and so it's like a little brain worm, and that's how you know that like messages are effective to people, right? It's like, and it makes intuitive sense because people are like, oh, if you switch to a tool, how often do you need to go to the tool you used to use, or are you able to switch effectively? And so I think that like, I never need to go back to Git is like an effective description of like, this is a tool that has completely fulfilled the use cases of my previous tool. And so I think that's why it's like a useful, and it's very simple and straightforward in terms of messaging. But yeah, that's actually the weird history I've adopted that was from that actually. So and it seems to be working, so we'll see if that continues to be a thing that people say. But I always kind of giggle when I see people say it on Hacker News. I'm like, yeah,
it's working. Plus 27 cents to my ads account. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I wanted to ask real quick, because I think we have the listener and viewer at least curious about JJ, and I do want to get into your role at the your new role and stuff. But for those sitting here listening and wondering, like, why? Like, what's the pitch for why they should consider using JJ?
So for me, the sort of most succinct way of describing it is that JJ is somehow both simpler and more powerful than Git is. And that's like real complicated and rare. And the reason that it's both simpler and more powerful is basically like it takes a lot of it like learns from both Git and Mercurial, are like the two biggest influences on JJ, which are obviously Git won for a reason, but a lot of people really love Mercurial for like other reasons. So I was able to look at these previous things and then sort of like think about like, okay, what concepts do you actually need in a version control system, and how do you fit them together? And so a lot of them, like JJ does away with some concepts in Git, but because of the way it's structured, you don't actually lose those features. You lose those features as special cases. So my primary example here is like stashing. So the like index in and I guess it's both the index and stashing together is like really the thing. But like the index in Git is a thing that a lot of people really love, and also a thing a lot of people really hate. Some people like, I want to craft my perfect commit by only stashing the parts of the stuff that I want to like be using. And other people are like, I use git commit -a and just always commit all of the things. But the fact that the index exists means that you need to add like other features as well. And so
are you talking about stashing or staging?
It's both. It's both staging. The problem is stashing needs to exist. This is me. I'm working on doing the pitch better in the thing. Stashing only exists because staging exists. And so like it's like both are connected. And so I really want to focus first on staging. So let's forget I said stash. So like the fact that the staging area, the index exists, means that, for example, git reset needs to have hard, soft, and mixed flags, because reset does different things based on what you want to have with your staging behavior, because the staging area exists as a thing at all. And the fact that you always need to be on a branch or working on a branch in Git means that like the stashing something needs to exist, because if you want to switch to something else, you need to like temporarily save the staging area, because the staging area exists like outside of commits, and you're always sort of like working ahead of a commit in Git. And so what JJ does is it eliminates the concept of the index entirely by you auto commit. Every time you run a JJ command, it snapshots your working directory and sort of appends that to the current commit that you're working on. And that's something that at first sounds kind of like scary to a Git user, especially one that loves the index and the staging area behavior, like I did, because you're like, well, I want to craft good commits, so like, I don't want to throw away that ability. But sort of the trick is that in JJ, you tend to sort of like work on a commit, one commit ahead. So if you're like implementing feature foo in Git, you're like working in the index area, and then you're like building up the thing in the index, and then you commit, I built thing foo. And in JJ, you tend to have an empty commit named I'm working on thing foo, and you have a new commit on top that you don't even bother naming, which is a whole separate good design decision. But like you build up stuff in that commit and then you push the changes you want back into the parent over time, and you've recreated the same idea as the index, but you don't need a specific index feature to enable that to happen. And that also means you don't need a stash specific feature. If you want to do the equivalent of a stash, you just make a new change on top of the one in your parent, and the old one still chills there, and now you're working next to it, and you go back to it whenever you want, but it's just another commit in your graph. And so you get like equivalent power, but you've eliminated an entire concept as a separate thing, which also means that you can, your commands get simpler. There's no, sort of the equivalent of reset in JJ doesn't have those 3 different flags because it does not need to care about the behavior for those things because the whole concept has gone away. And it also means that because the index is just a commit, you can use all the tools that you want that work with commits on your index. So you actually gain power because you get more powerful tools to work with your index than before, because it's not like a whole separate thing. It's just you can use all of the same tools that you use for everything else. So it ends up being conceptually simpler and more powerful simultaneously. I hope that's like a good explanation. It's like a little tortured, especially with Git. I always want to be talking about I want to have like a whiteboard. I want to be like drawing lines and stuff because I think I'm very visual when it comes to like version control. I visualize the tree in my head all the time. So anyway, sorry, Matt, you wanted to say something?
No, you're good.
On for a minute.
I didn't appreciate JJ's sort of auto snapshot feature until I got more people on my team at Oxide and I started context switching more frequently and going to review their changes or just switching branches and stuff like that. And I say switching branches because there is no branches, but you know what I mean. Because in JJ, like you said, if I'm in the middle of working on something, in Git, I would have to create some sort of fake commit that doesn't mean anything to me yet, right? Say hey, work in progress, working on foo, but I'm trying to switch to bar real quick. Save that commit or commit that commit, and then switch my branch because my staging area is clean, so I can switch branches. Or stash it, like you're saying, switch branches, and then now have to remember oh, I stashed this. So let me go back and
there's a stack of stashes, but I never use that.
I never used the stack either. I've only used one.
Impossible.
Yeah, exactly. It's so hidden. It's specifically the stash area or stack is hidden, so you don't really know. You can view it with commands or whatever, but it's not there in front of you. And in JJ, I can just be in the middle of working on something, not having committed anything yet, didn't do anything, just JJ new, working on foo, blah blah blah, making some file changes, and then my coworker says, "Hey, review this PR," and I can go check out their stuff, right? I can fetch, I can check out their branch, and leave without having to do some sort of stash or whatever. And JJ has that saved there as a snapshot, and you see it when you run JJ. You see that empty, commit essentially just sitting there that you didn't have to do anything with, and it's just so seamless. And I didn't appreciate that until I started doing that context switching more, and I was like, oh, I don't miss stash at all. I don't need this at all. That was actually a headache. And then the complement there is the conflicts. So when you are switching around to these things in Git, you have to make sure that your working tree is always clean. So when conflicts arise, you have to handle them right now. And JJ is nah, I'll keep a track of those conflicts for you in your history. You should handle them at some point, but you don't have to do it right now. So it gives you that sort of ability to keep moving around, being fluid, without having to manage that staging area all the time. And for me, that was a huge burden lift, just getting rid of all of that crap. And I like it. I don't know. I didn't appreciate it at first because you don't think about it like that. But then once you free yourself from this, you're oh, that was a lot of overhead actually.
Yeah. And it's sometimes hard to explain because all of these features sort of rely on multiple design decisions working together to appreciate how it works. And so I've because of these kinds of things, I end up having a cleaner. I'm one of those people that likes a clean version control history. I'm not always perfect at accomplishing it, but you do it as much as the tool lets you do it easily. And so I definitely as a docs person, I'll often be doing work and I'll find a typo in some documentation. And so what I want to do is send in a typo fix as its own pull request, because that's its own thing. And I don't want to just roll in an unrelated typo fix to, a particular thing. And in Git, sometimes I do that, but sometimes I wouldn't. If you're in the middle of working on something, you don't want to get out of the flow of like, okay, now I have to do git commit -a lol. Now I have to like switch over to the main branch again. And then I have to find my code again, where in the code the message is, and then like change the doc commit, and then type in the commit message, and then send in a PR, and then switch back to the thing, and then either just now work on top of that lol commit, or like use git reset to like undo it as a commit and put it back in your index. Whereas in JJ, because I don't need to name commits or branches ahead of time. So one of the interesting things about JJ is that when you make a new commit, or we call it a change in JJ, you don't need to name it. Like you don't need to give it a commit description at all until you want to. So what this lets you do is I can make, while I'm like in my editor doing the change with the thing that I'm working on, I can make the change in my code, type JJ split, which lets me split a commit into two. I choose the doc fix and split it off, and now it's in a new change on top of the one I'm working on. And then I can type JJ describe -m or JJ describe, and then with a -r to point to that commit by saying like I want to change the description of the commit that's ahead of me, and be like typo fix, and then type JJ rebase -r -d trunk to like rebase that new commit on top of the trunk branch without even moving away from the thing I'm working on. And then I can type JJ get push -c with that change ID and push it up to a pull request. And I've never even swapped away from the thing that I'm currently working on, because the commands all have flags that let me say what thing I want to work on. And because I'm able to work on stuff that's like not where I'm changed. And so I never even swapped away from my current work. And I've now sent in a pull request with that typo fix without leaving my editor, without changing where I'm at in the graph of source control. And that's like really trivial. And that only works because of like 5 or 6 different design decisions that JJ makes slightly differently than Git. A lot of JJ is sort of like, what if we did what Git does, but we invert the decision that they made? And it like turns out that like when those things work together, it like is very seamless. And so you can kind of do, is that something you cannot do in Git? Like, no. I described how I would do it in Git first. But does it make it so simple to do that I do it more often because it's really easy, whereas it's like kind of annoying to do in Git? Yes, absolutely. And I think that means I produce cleaner Git histories. And Matt mentioned another feature that's like unique, that's not like able to be done in raw stock Git, which is the ability to leave commits in a conflicted state. So if you rebase and there's a merge conflict, JJHub says, hey, by the way, this commit has a conflict. You're going to need to resolve it before you fix it. But you don't have to do it immediately. And Git rebase works by literally reapplying the patches like on top of it. It goes into your actual file system and actually replaces all the files and does that for every single step. And so if anything happens with a conflict, you need to handle it while you're doing the rebase immediately, because Git doesn't know how to tolerate stuff that's not in a working state. But JJ is just like, that's fine, and you can handle it whenever you want. And that's the thing that doesn't come up as useful. In the simple case, people are like, well, why would I ever do that? And it's like, well, because Git doesn't let you do that, you never find the cases where doing that would be useful, because it's just literally impossible. So like I have a command called rebase all that's a alias I wrote that rebases all of my current outstanding work on top of the trunk branch or main or master, whatever you want to call it. And so that's only possible because if I'm rebasing 5 different open branches I have and 2 of them are conflicted, Git would make me like immediately handle whatever that random conflict is. But if those are branches I don't want to work on right now, I can leave them conflicted and be like, okay, I know that I actually need to update those before I push it up to GitHub or whatever. And I can do that whenever I choose. I can work on those other 3 branches that are unconflicted first and then come back to that later. Whereas Git would force me to context switch if I tried to write an equivalent command. It's like helpful.
Yeah, rebasing in so many ways is just obnoxious, because you're like, oh, especially if you're trying to rebase a lot, like one commit on top of a lot of them, it's like, oh god, there's just a lot of work that you have to do to make that function properly.
Yeah, JJ automatically rebases. Like you can go back in the history and edit a commit, and then it will auto rebase all of the children automatically. and you don't even generally notice that it's happening because it's so seamless. And like sometimes they'll introduce a commit, but like if I'm working on a PR that's got 5 commits in it and someone gives me review feedback, this kind of gets to how GitHub's UI is not optimal, but like I can go back to the third commit in the change and then modify it, and then it'll rebase the children automatically as I'm working, and it's just fine. You don't even think about it. So like a lot of times the stuff that you would be manually trying to rebase things, you just like don't even need to use rebase at all because you're implicitly rebasing whenever you change something that has children. It just does it for you. And it's able to just do it for you because if it made you deal with the conflicts immediately, then like every time you save something in your editor, you may have to like fix a conflict later in the graph, and that would take you way out of your workflow. And so this is another like subtle example where not rebasing immediately makes sense, is that like if I'm working on something that's got children and my changes invalidate those children, I want to finish what I'm doing before I bother to go fix those children commits. And like if I had to fix it immediately, I'd constantly be back and forth between like what I'm doing now and then fixing the problem that it caused in the future or whatever. So
right. Yeah, this kind of reminds me a bit of like how, like in kind of the database world, where people are very, very much like, we need linearizability or serializability. Like these are very important concepts, and it's like, yeah, but because you've designed everything with this, like everything has to always be correct in mind, you kind of shackle yourself from the ability to do things where it's like, yeah, sometimes like in an eventual consistent world, like sometimes things can be a little out of sync or a little weird, and then you'll like fix that later. And it's like when you
No, I mean, all this to say is like, so GitHub clearly solved a problem for people that were using Git as their source control system. So now that JJ is here and it has different backend compatible source systems, is there a replacement for GitHub coming? Like what do you think? Like
the general idea is that yes, like there's a JJHub is like the simplest possible one-word way of explaining what we're doing. I don't think it really explains why things will be interesting and better. It's important, as I was saying earlier, to like articulate the technical like value that a thing brings. And so if it was
There's another like thing I was thinking about earlier that like the moment kind of moved on, but I think it's like an interesting point about kind of what this whole why JJ is designed the way it is and why it's kind of gaining popularity. I think we were talking a few episodes ago about forking and how much people tend to be like, oh, you can just like fork the project if you don't like what's going on. And it's like, but no, because there's all of this other stuff that goes into like why people are using the thing. Like, as you mentioned, like, you know, there was a tutorial. It wasn't exactly that good. So like you wrote another one, and Matt, you did a tutorial. And like lots of people do tutorials, and you kind of build up all of this knowledge base of things that help people get on board with it. And you kind of refine the argument of like, why should you use this thing over the other thing over time? And when you like fork into a new project, you effectively lose all of that stuff, because like you have to make your fork compelling enough for people to move to it. Like, has to be a reason why people would move to the new thing instead of staying on the old thing. But you also just don't have any of the stuff to actually explain it to people or really explain it well to people. So it takes like actually a tremendous amount of effort to do a fork. And then and then there's the whole situation too where you're like, oh, I don't want to fork, I just want to replace this thing with a new thing. And that also takes like a tremendous amount of effort. And I think like we as a community, we as like an industry need to like really acknowledge that it's really silly to just say just fork things. I know like very smart people say just fork things. So it's like not a knock against them, but I think it's like code wise, sure, that's easy, but like actual like community and social wise, like no, that's actually a very challenging thing to do. And we should like think hard and deep about that. And when you go into a project, remember that's a thing that you're going to have to do.
I mean, we're going to have Steve on after he settles in his new role. We have to continue this conversation because there's
tons of stuff we can talk about.
Yeah.
Like you can even just talk about JJ design decisions or like getting started or like the way to shift your mental model. There's like an infinite number of things to talk about with new tooling. So
I want to get you, I want you to get a little bit settled in your new role, and then we can talk more about things because there's a lot to unpack here. And hopefully this is like enough of a teaser for people to be interested in JJ and what's going on there. And hopefully just keep a lookout.
And also, if they're not interested, then we'll know too. It's easier than talk about something else.
This is true. It's not like we'll only talk about JJ going forward, but you know.
If I'm joining as a host, it's going to become the JJ podcast because another funny Rust versus JJ comparison is a tool people love so much they won't shut the fuck up about it. And so I literally have had people be like, so Oxide has a 30-minute like water cooler meeting in the mornings where we just like talk about random stuff. And the other day it was like talking about JJ stuff, and somebody joined and they were like, "Oh, of course y'all are talking about JJ because you can't stop talking about JJ because you like JJ so much." And I was like, "Yeah, it's how it goes sometimes." So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I think we should move ourselves on to. Oh wait, we got to do one thing. We do have to do one thing, because someone's just like, "Hey, you used to have this segment called Unpopular Opinions / Break and Recover. What happened to that? Are you going to bring it back?" And then I foolishly replied to that person. I was like, "Yeah, we're definitely going to do it in the next episode because we have Matt and Steve, and they'll have lots of unpopular opinions." So very quickly, probably don't even, let's go old school unpopular opinions and just drop it. But we're not going to add context. So
yeah, let's just drop them all and like leave no explanation.
I mean, I already did one, so I feel like I kicked this off already.
I know, but no, Steve, you need another one because now we're in the actual segment.
Okay.
So, and I know you have many unpopular opinions.
Yeah,
so.
I'll think about what it's going to be.
Okay, Matt, if you want to go first, give us an unpop.
My unpopular opinion is that the README for your project is more meant for people that are developing it than it is for people that are strictly using it. Because I've seen really, really bad READMEs for projects where it's over indexed on the whole user aspect of it, but then you go to like actually work with the project and no build instructions, no understanding of how to use this thing from a developer's perspective. So make sure you include that in there. That's my unpopular.
Okay.
Little mild today, but I spent like this whole 6-hour plane ride or whatever, 5-hour plane ride coming home, and I'm just like frustrated with some of these things out there that I'm seeing. And I have many blog posts to write now because I'm just, the frustration has boiled over and I need to write about it. And this is one of the areas of frustration is the READMEs. I go to these projects and I'm like, this README is garbage. Like I might as well have just asked Claude to like scribe this code better. You did nothing. So make sure that if a competent developer is going up to your project to understand how to work with it, there's something there to use. But anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I have one. Most modern databases are garbage, and we should really build new ones because the current ones we have are awful. I will specifically say I think I've had a change of heart, and I don't really like Postgres anymore. I used to be like, just use Postgres by default, and now I'm kind of like, actually, I think that this is just a giant ball of a mess, and I get why people use it, but I'm also just like, I don't think I like this database. I think I'm becoming a MySQL fan if I have to use a relational database, but in general, I'm just like, I think we should be building our own stuff, or at least not building one giant, like relying on one giant layer. I think there should be those 3 separate layers of like your storage layer, your data layer, and your query layer. And
what happens when all of those layers are in the cloud? The cloud goes down.
Well, then you should have backups, like being multi-region.
Oh man.
Okay, I feel like that one that's a spicy one. Yeah. Hey Steve, have you thought of an unpop?
Yeah, I think my unpopular opinion is boilerplate code is fine actually. I have a project. The project that I'm working on at work that I'm going to be handing off to other people is like, there's a lot of instances where I could use like a Rust macro to clean up some boilerplate, but I deliberately have not done that because sometimes a bunch of code that's very straightforward and kind of repetitive is easier to understand than trying to write something fancy that will make it less lines of code because it's like fine. And so there's a lot of times in Rust where you have like one struct you're trying to make and you have 2 or 3 other structs you want to make it out of. And instead of abstracting it away, I've just written the lines of code that are like, here's each line, that in which part it goes to the other thing. And that's like fine and good and okay. And maybe it makes for a bigger diff, but it's also really, really easy to read and very straightforward. And I think that can more often than not, people over rely on drying up code that is better left. Like a little repetition is better than not. To halfway use the Go aphorism, but not.
I was gonna say, you're just making all the Go listeners very happy today.
Exactly. Yeah. It's I don't fully agree with everything about that in the Go world and the way that they do those things, but I do think that it is easy to go too far in the other direction as well. And I've been like a little less going in that direction, and I think that it has served me well, because now when I'm handing that project off to somebody else, it is much easier for them to understand what is going on, because I have not made a crazy pillar of abstractions. So yeah.
So basically you're saying people should stop code golfing because it sucks.
Yes. There is value in reducing repetition, but you can take it too far. And I think a lot of people do take it too far because it's fun to take it too far, not because it's actually useful.
Okay. I like those. I think we came with some good unpops there. So
we'll get someone that comments in the chat about them. Okay, well, it's fine. We're covered, Kris. Steve's getting clipped this episode. He's canceled. we're good. We sit under the radar today. Yeah,
we didn't say anything incendiary.
Yeah.
Steve. That's why we have Steve on, so I can make clips of him and put it onto the internet. And people
exactly.
Exactly. Like I think I released a clip the other day that says like DHH made Rails irrelevant, and I'm like, I want this one to blow up so bad because I just
we'll see how it goes.
I think it's gonna be one of those ones that just kind of sits there for like a few weeks or months, and then somebody stumbles upon it, and then all of a sudden it's on Hacker News, and you're like, oh god, oh no. But alas, we have come to the end of this episode of Fall Through. Steve, Matt, do you have any last words before we close out here?
Just don't be afraid to evaluate your tools every now and then. See what's out there. I think you'll be surprised.
Yep. My last is Git is cool. I like JJ more. I'm gonna use JJ in the future. You might want to check it out. And if it doesn't work for you, that's also cool. We should use the tools we want to use.
AKA, please don't cancel me.
No, it's just like
I'm just messing with you.
Yeah, totally. I do believe that very sincerely. Like I don't need every last developer to use JJ, or else, like it's a problem. Like I just think that I want to share a thing I like with people, and other people are not me and they like different things. So you may not like it, but I think that a lot of people think it's better, and so you may too.
Okay, I like that. Well, thank you both for joining for another episode. And thank you, listener/viewer, for joining us today. What are your thoughts? Are you going to go out and try using JJ? Have you already been using JJ? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Let us know in the comments and on social media. This episode of Fall Through was hosted by Chris Brando with co-hosts Matthew Sanabria and Steve Klabnik. Fall Through is produced by Chris Brando and Angelica Hill, and our beats are by Breakmaster Cylinder.
Bye.
Bye!
You know what I mean? Like I know things, I think.
And I was like, ding, that's a good slogan.
Picturing being like,
It's the sun.
Somebody that I used to go. Ding.